Imagine this. You're at a bustling airport, the kind of place where everyone's rushing to catch a flight, the hum of voices blending with the roar of announcements overhead. It's just another Tuesday, right? People coming and going, each with their own story, their own destination. But what happens next is something no one expects. Least of all the woman standing in line, minding her own business, about to board a flight home. Her name is Maya Johnson. She's wearing a simple gray hoodie and sweatpants, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. Nothing about her stands out. She's just another passenger, hoping to catch a few hours of rest on her first-class flight. But the second her passport hits the counter, the game changes. You see, the gate agent, let's call her Lisa, doesn't see a federal investigator. She sees a woman who doesn't belong in first class. First class. Lisa sneers. With that sweatshirt? Sure you are, sweetheart. Her words sting. You can feel the judgment in the air. And then, without a second thought, Lisa does the unthinkable. She rips Maya's passport in half. Right there at the gate, in front of everyone. It's loud. It's shocking. And it's completely unjustified. But what Lisa doesn't know is that Maya is not your average passenger. She's not someone to back down, not someone to be underestimated. In fact, Maya has the power to shut this entire operation down. She's a senior investigator with the TSA, trained to spot security risks and enforce the law across the entire nation's aviation system. And in that moment, the stakes just went from uncomfortable to catastrophic. What Lisa thought was a small, petty victory, it was about to explode into a storm that no one, least of all the airline, could have seen coming. The question is, what happens when a single act of prejudice collides with the unrelenting force of justice? Stay tuned. This is a story that's going to make you rethink the way you see power, privilege, and the consequences of every decision we make. Maya Johnson wasn't your average woman walking through an airport terminal. At first glance, she looked like just another traveler on a tight schedule, wearing a simple gray hoodie, sweatpants, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense bun, and her eyes, though tired, had a sharp focus that spoke volumes about the kind of person she was. She was a woman who knew what she was doing and where she was going, even if she looked like she was just trying to catch a nap on a flight home. Maya wasn't traveling for leisure. She just spent the last 10 days working undercover, part of an intensive security audit of several major airports in the country. The project, code-named Operation Safe Skies, was something she had pioneered herself. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't even fun. But it was necessary. Her job was to assess vulnerabilities in the nation's aviation security and make sure every loophole was closed. Maya was the kind of person who thrived on the details, the fine print that others overlooked. Every small discrepancy could be a massive threat. That's what made her so good at her job. The work was exhausting. Long hours, sleepless nights, and constant travel. But it was also rewarding in its own way. At the end of the day, she knew she was doing something important. It wasn't just about the systems and protocols. It was about keeping people safe. Keeping America's skies safe. And that was a responsibility she didn't take lightly. After a week of grueling operations, Maya was looking forward to nothing more than a peaceful flight back home to Washington, D.C. The flight would give her a few hours to decompress, to catch up on her reading, and maybe even get a few hours of sleep. She had earned it. But as she walked through the terminal at LaGuardia Airport, Maya's mind was already shifting back into work mode. Even though she was off duty, the investigator in her never fully shut off. Her eyes scanned the crowd, subtle, but sharp, taking in every movement, every action. It was a habit, one she couldn't shake. Maya had seen it all. She'd been to some of the busiest airports in the country, working undercover, observing the people who made sure flights took off and landed smoothly. She knew how easy it was for something to slip through the cracks. But today, she wasn't thinking about work. She was thinking about getting home. She was thinking about the comfort of her own bed, the peace of a quiet evening after a long week. She walked toward the gate, slipping her boarding pass out of her pocket, already anticipating the moment when she'd settle into her first-class seat. It wasn't about luxury. It was about having space to breathe after days of tight schedules and high-pressure situations. This was her small reward for all the stress and exhaustion. But as she stepped up to the counter, Maya had no idea that this was going to be the moment that changed everything. Maya approached the gate counter, her mind still caught in the fog of her exhausting week. She pulled out her boarding pass and prepared to scan it, ready to relax during the flight home. But as soon as she reached the counter, she felt a shift in the air. The gate agent, Lisa, glanced up from her screen and immediately sized Maya up with a scrutinizing look. There was something in the way Lisa's gaze lingered on Maya's hoodie and sneakers. Judgment, perhaps, or something deeper. First class? With that sweatshirt? Lisa's tone was dripping with skepticism. Maya was used to this. She had faced this kind of judgment before, the kind that assumed you didn't belong based on the way you looked or dressed. She took a steadying breath and replied calmly, "Yes, that's right." Lisa didn't seem convinced. She looked at Maya's boarding pass, then back at her face, her expression unreadable. "This passport doesn't look like you," she said, as if inspecting Maya's ID was a personal insult. Maya stood her ground. "It's a 5-year-old picture," she explained evenly, "but it's still me." Lisa wasn't listening. Instead, she flipped through the pages of the passport with exaggerated attention, clearly dismissing the idea of just scanning it and moving on. Maya could feel the tension building. This wasn't just a simple document check anymore. Something was off. After several moments of flipping through the pages, Lisa held the passport up to the light, scrutinizing the photo as though trying to uncover a hidden flaw. "Funny," she muttered. "You look younger here. Happier. Is this really you?" The dismissive comment stung, but Maya kept her composure. She had dealt with much worse in her line of work. "It's me," she said firmly. "I'm Maya Johnson. If you need verification, I can wait for your supervisor." Lisa ignored her and kept tapping at the data page. "Doctor of what? Philosophy? Art history? Let me guess." The mockery in her voice was unmistakable. Maya's patience was starting to thin. "Aeronautical engineering," she replied, her voice still calm but with a sharp edge. "Now, may I board my flight?" Lisa didn't stop. "First class, a new passport, it doesn't add up," she said, her voice lowering to a near whisper but loud enough for the growing line behind Maya to hear. The words hit Maya like a slap. This wasn't about a passport. This was about something deeper. Maya knew what was happening. The unspoken bias, the judgment. Lisa was assuming that someone who looked like Maya, dressed like Maya, couldn't possibly belong in first class. And now, Maya was being accused of something far worse. "I assure you it's legitimate," Maya said, her voice steady now, but her patience running thin. "You can verify it through your system." But Lisa wasn't having it. "People like you," she said, almost as an afterthought, "can be very resourceful." The words felt like a direct blow to the chest. Maya's heart raced. She had seen this kind of microaggression before, but it was different when it was happening to her. Something snapped inside her. "You are making serious accusations," Maya said, her voice hardening. "Scan the document, verify it, or call your supervisor. But you will not stand here and slander me." Lisa paused for a moment, staring at Maya with a mixture of disbelief and defiance. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Maya knew that this was no longer just about a passport. This was about respect, about power, about race. The passengers in line had gone quiet. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't care. She wasn't backing down. Lisa, still standing behind the counter, glanced at the passport in her hands and then at Maya, clearly unsure of what to do next. But Maya was done waiting. "You have a procedure," Maya said, her voice now final. "Use it." The tension between Maya and Lisa was palpable, hanging thick in the air like smoke, and it seemed to stretch on forever. Maya stood tall, her patience running low, but her determination unwavering. Lisa, on the other hand, was beginning to crack under the pressure. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held Maya's passport, as if she could feel the weight of the situation creeping up on her. Lisa glanced at the passport again, eyes scanning the pages with a heightened intensity. The longer she took, the more Maya felt the frustration building inside her. This wasn't just about a mistake anymore. It was about something far deeper. Maya had dealt with people questioning her credentials, her identity, her place in the world, so many times before, but this felt different. It wasn't just a matter of verification. It was a matter of judgment. A judgment based on appearance, assumptions, and bias. Maya wasn't just being asked to prove who she was. She was being told she didn't belong. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier. Maya's calm, composed exterior barely hid the storm raging inside her. She was tired. She was frustrated. She was fed up. But she refused to give in. She wasn't going to let Lisa, or anyone, get away with this kind of treatment. You know, Maya said, her voice quiet but cold, this kind of thing doesn't just happen by accident. She took a step forward, narrowing the space between them. People like you don't get to decide who belongs in first class. You don't get to judge me based on how I look, or what I wear, or the color of my skin. I am who I say I am, and I've earned everything I have. Lisa flinched slightly at the words. The smugness that had been present in her demeanor just moments before was now replaced by a flicker of doubt. Her lips tightened, but she didn't speak, almost as if she were trying to process what Maya had said. Maya could see it now, the cracks in Lisa's confidence. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Maya's voice grew more forceful, more insistent. You don't know who I am. You don't know anything about me. But I know exactly who you are. You're the person standing in my way, making assumptions based on a stereotype, and that's not something I'm going to tolerate. Lisa opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though the entire gate area had frozen, waiting to see how this would play out. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her professional instincts kicked in. She had worked in high-stress environments before, had faced situations where lives were on the line. This was nothing compared to the pressure she was used to, but it was still an assault on her dignity, and that was something she couldn't ignore. You think this is just about a passport, don't you? Maya said, her voice now taking on a sharper edge. You think it's just about a document, but it's not. It's about what you've just done. It's about what you've just said. You've disrespected me. You've questioned me. And you've tried to undermine everything I've worked for. The passengers behind Maya shuffled uncomfortably, sensing the building tension. Some of them had started filming on their phones, the cameras catching the escalating drama. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the confrontation between Maya and Lisa. Lisa finally spoke, but her words came out weak. I didn't mean to. She trailed off, unsure of how to defend herself. But it was too late for apologies. Maya wasn't interested in excuses. Not now. You don't get to say, I didn't mean to, Maya shot back, her voice hard as steel. You don't get to do this and then act like it's no big deal. You just ripped up my passport, Lisa. You destroyed a federal document. You've just committed a felony. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, there was complete silence. Lisa's eyes widened as the reality of what Maya had just said began to sink in. She looked at the torn passport, the two halves lying on the counter, and then back at Maya. Her face drained of color, the bravado evaporating in an instant. I didn't mean... Lisa stammered again, but Maya wasn't listening. The moment had passed. There was no going back now. You did mean it, Maya said, cutting her off. You meant every word, every look, every judgment you made. And now, you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. Lisa's gaze flickered to the passengers around her, who were now openly watching, some still filming, others whispering among themselves. The scene had turned from a small, personal confrontation to something much bigger, a public spectacle. I'm not going to argue with you, Maya continued, her voice steady. I've been through enough to know when someone's been treated unfairly. And right now, you're the one who's in the wrong. I'm not going to let you get away with this. The weight of Maya's words landed hard. Lisa stood frozen, unable to respond, her face a mixture of disbelief and panic. She had crossed a line, and now, the realization was sinking in. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. Maya's eyes hardened. I want your supervisor. Oh. And I want this incident reported. I'm not going to let you destroy my passport and then act like nothing happened. At that moment, Lisa's knees buckled slightly, as if the pressure had become too much. She hesitated for a long beat, before finally reaching for her radio. I need to call someone, she said, her voice shaking. Maya nodded, her expression still cool. Good. And while you do that, I'm going to make sure the right people hear about this. The damage had already been done. But now, Maya was taking control of the situation. She wasn't just a victim in this moment. She was the one who would determine how it ended. The truth was, this wasn't just a confrontation over a passport. It was about power, about control, about who gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't. Maya knew that, and she wasn't going to back down. The supervisor would be here soon, and when they arrived, the situation would be far from over. Maya wasn't going to let this go until the right people understood the gravity of what had just happened. Maya stood her ground, watching as Lisa fumbled with the radio, her hands trembling. The gate area felt heavy with tension, passengers glancing between the two women, unsure of how this would unfold. Maya's eyes remained fixed on Lisa, her posture unwavering, her calm demeanor now a force to be reckoned with. Lisa's voice, once brimming with authority, now came out shaky as she tried to call for a supervisor. "I need help at gate B32. I need a supervisor here now," she said, her words clipped and tense. Maya remained silent but unyielding. She wasn't going to let this moment slip by. She wasn't going to let Lisa's prejudices be swept under the rug. Not today. Maya had dealt with worse, had faced far more dangerous situations, but this was personal. This was a battle over dignity, over respect. And Maya knew that once this moment passed, things would never be the same. "You can call your supervisor all you want, Lisa," Maya said, her voice cool and firm. "But you've already crossed a line. You've destroyed my passport. That's a federal crime. And now, I'm demanding accountability." Lisa's face drained of color as the weight of Maya's words hit her. She shifted uncomfortably, staring at the torn passport lying on the counter. For the first time, she seemed to realize the severity of what had just happened. She wasn't just dealing with a frustrated passenger. She was facing a federal investigator. Maya took a step closer, her presence now commanding the space. "You don't get to judge me," Maya continued, her voice rising just enough to make Lisa flinch. "You don't get to tear up my passport based on your assumptions. I belong here. I earned my seat. And you need to follow the law." Lisa looked at her, trying to regain her composure, but the fight had left her. Maya's words hung in the air like a challenge that Lisa couldn't ignore. As the radio crackled in Lisa's hand, Maya heard the supervisor's voice coming through. "What's going on, Lisa?" Frank Miller, the station supervisor, was on his way, and Maya knew that this was the moment to shift the power dynamic completely. Frank walked up, his eyes scanning the crowd and landing on Maya and Lisa. He saw the torn passport and the intense standoff. Maya could feel his gaze on her, assessing, sizing her up, trying to gauge how to handle the situation. Lisa opened her mouth to explain but faltered. Maya cut her off, her voice now sharp. "I'll explain it to him," she said, addressing Frank directly. "This woman just ripped up my passport. I'm a federal investigator, and I'm asking you to handle this properly. She's destroyed a government document." Frank's brow furrowed as he processed the words, but he didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation yet. That's serious," he said, looking at Lisa, who was now visibly shaking. "What happened?" Maya stood tall, her voice unwavering. "It's not about what happened. It's about what was done. Lisa questioned my identity, assumed my passport was fake, and then destroyed it. That's illegal." Frank glanced at Lisa, whose face was pale, and then back at Maya. It was clear he didn't want to escalate things, but he also realized that this was no ordinary situation. Maya stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm not leaving until this is handled. You can call TSA if you need to, but I'm not letting her get away with this. She's violated my rights, and I won't let it slide." Frank hesitated, the tension thick in the air. He looked at the torn passport on the counter, and his eyes widened. He understood now that this wasn't just a minor incident. It was a major issue. "All right," Frank said, his voice finally taking on a more serious tone. "I'll get TSA on this." Maya nodded. "Good. And I want this reported. You're going to follow protocol, and so will Lisa." Lisa looked between Frank and Maya, her face crumpling in fear. She had been caught in her own mistake, and now there was no way out. The realization was settling in. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "You're going to face the consequences of your actions," Maya said, her voice low but firm. "And so is everyone else who allowed this kind of treatment to go unchallenged." Frank nodded, his gaze shifting to Lisa, who was still standing there, frozen in place. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Maya wasn't just a passenger. She was someone with the authority to bring the full force of the law down on them. Lisa's actions had just triggered a chain reaction that couldn't be undone. Frank glanced at the other passengers who were now watching the scene unfold. The quiet murmurs had stopped, replaced by an almost eerie silence. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but it didn't faze her. She was used to being the center of attention, especially when it meant standing up for what was right. Lisa, now completely defeated, reached for the radio again, her fingers shaking. I'll report this," she muttered, clearly broken. Maya's eyes never left her. "You will," she said. "But you'll be reported for more than just this. Your actions are part of a bigger issue, and I'm going to make sure it's addressed." Frank, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded again. "We'll handle it from here," he said. But Maya could tell that his tone wasn't just about dealing with the paperwork. This was about damage control. And Maya had made it clear that the damage wouldn't be swept under the rug. Maya took a deep breath, letting the weight of the situation settle around her. The power had shifted. She had taken control. And now, Lisa, Frank, and everyone watching knew that Maya Johnson wasn't someone to be underestimated. Not now, not ever. The gate area felt charged with tension as Frank returned to the scene, his expression more serious than when he left. Behind him was a TSA agent, walking with purpose. Maya, her stance unwavering, watched as the two approached her. "Okay, Maya," Frank said, his voice a little less certain now. "I've contacted TSA. They're pulling up the footage from the security cameras. We're starting the investigation." Maya nodded, her face calm but resolute. She knew that this wasn't just about getting her passport replaced. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions, and making sure it didn't happen again. "I want a full audit of the incident," Maya said, her tone sharp. "Not just the passport destruction. I want to know everything about Lisa's conduct over the past 48 hours. Any complaints, any odd behavior, anything that could point to a larger issue." Frank shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at Lisa, who stood nervously off to the side. "Lisa's been with us for years," Frank explained hesitantly. "She's usually a good worker, but this isn't normal." Maya didn't let him finish. "This is exactly the problem, Frank," she cut in. "You keep excusing this behavior. You know as well as I do that it's not just about one mistake. It's about what happens when these small acts of bias go unchecked. This situation is a symptom of a bigger issue, and we need to address it head-on." Frank nodded slowly, finally grasping the full scope of the situation. "I'll get the records. All of them. We'll look at her history, see if there are any patterns." Maya's eyes never left Lisa, who stood there, her shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact. Lisa looked defeated, but the reality of the situation was just beginning to hit her. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. "I need the full report," Maya continued, "and I want it within the next hour. I also want a complete review of Lisa's security training and her past performance reviews. You need to know if she's received proper training on identifying fake documents and following the correct procedures." Frank, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, looked at Lisa and then back at Maya. "We'll get it for you. Everything," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of the moment. He turned to the TSA agent. "Please pull her personnel files, security reports, and any past complaints immediately. I want all the relevant information." The TSA agent nodded and walked off toward the back office to begin gathering the requested documents. Maya, still standing at the counter, took a deep breath. This wasn't just about one moment of disrespect, it was about revealing how systemic issues fester within the system. This wasn't just Lisa's fault. This was a failure of oversight. A failure to ensure that people like Lisa couldn't get away with prejudice without any consequences. Frank's voice broke through her thoughts. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said, looking at her with genuine regret. "I should have noticed this sooner. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten." Maya raised her hand slightly, signaling him to stop. "It's not just about you, Frank. This happens every day in small ways that people ignore. Lisa was allowed to act this way because there was no accountability. If we don't address this now, nothing will change. And that's what's wrong with the system. It allows bias to hide in plain sight. Frank nodded, understanding now that this was more than just a passenger complaint. This was about ensuring that the system worked for everyone, fairly and without discrimination. The TSA agent returned soon after, carrying a folder filled with papers. He handed it over to Maya, and she immediately began scanning through it. The documents revealed a pattern she'd feared. Several complaints, mostly from passengers of color, had been filed against Lisa over the years. Minor infractions at first: rude behavior, dismissive attitudes, and unprofessional comments. But as Maya flipped through the pages, the incidents seemed to escalate. One particular complaint stood out. A report from a woman who had been accused of having a fake passport simply because her name didn't match the expectations of the gate agent. Another report mentioned an incident where a passenger, visibly nervous, was treated with unnecessary suspicion for simply asking about boarding procedures. The patterns were clear. Maya looked up from the documents and met Frank's gaze. "This is more than just one incident, Frank. Lisa has a history of treating people this way. And it's not just with me. It's with other passengers who don't meet her expectations, who don't look like her idea of someone who belongs in first class." Frank looked down at the documents, his expression darkening. "I didn't know it was this bad," he murmured. "You didn't know because you didn't look," Maya replied, her voice firm. "This isn't just about one employee. This is about a pattern of behavior that goes unchecked, that gets ignored until someone like me comes along and demands accountability." Frank sighed, clearly defeated. "What do we do now?" Maya stood tall, her resolve clear. "Now we make sure this goes through the proper channels. I'm filing a formal complaint with the FAA, and I want this entire situation reviewed. Lisa's actions today weren't an accident. This is part of a bigger problem." Frank nodded, his earlier hesitation replaced by a more serious expression. "I'll make sure it's done. Everything. I won't let it slide." Maya took a final glance at the documents before handing them back to the TSA agent. "I'll be in touch. And I want to stay updated on this investigation. No matter how long it takes, this needs to be handled properly." Frank nodded again, his posture now a reflection of the gravity of the situation. "It will be. I'll make sure of it." As Maya turned to walk away, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't over yet. But the first steps toward justice had been taken, and that was all that mattered. The investigation had only just begun, but the power to change the system had already shifted. The tension in the gate area was palpable, but Maya stood tall, her composure unwavering. Lisa was nowhere to be seen, likely off to a back office, still processing what had just transpired. Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. The damage had been done, but now it was time for accountability. Lisa had to face the consequences for her actions, and Maya was determined to see that it happened. Frank returned shortly, his expression more somber than before. Behind him, the TSA agent Maya had seen earlier carried a thick folder, clearly loaded with information. "Maya," Frank began, his voice quiet, "I've got the full report. Personnel records, her training history, and every complaint filed against Lisa in the past 2 years." He paused, his eyes scanning the folder. "This isn't just one mistake. This is a pattern." Maya took the folder, her fingers grazing the pages. As she skimmed through the documents, her suspicions were confirmed. The complaints about Lisa's behavior, rude comments, questioning passengers for no reason, unnecessary delays, all pointed to a disturbing trend. Maya had suspected this wasn't an isolated incident, and now she had the proof in her hands. One of the reports that stood out was from a woman who had been questioned at length about her passport, even though it was perfectly valid. Another complaint detailed a passenger of color who had been flagged for additional screening for no apparent reason other than how they looked. The reports were damning, a clear indication that Lisa's behavior was systemic. Maya closed the folder and looked at Frank. "This is more than just one incident," she said, her voice firm. "Lisa's actions have been overlooked for far too long. She's been allowed to operate with bias, and that needs to be addressed. Now." Frank nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I'll make sure this gets escalated, Maya. I'll get HR involved, and we'll begin a full investigation. But this could take time. You know how these things work. Maya didn't flinch. I'm not asking for an immediate fix, Frank. What I want is accountability. I want Lisa to answer for her actions. And I want the people who enabled this to be held accountable, too. Frank hesitated. This isn't just Lisa. There are other employees here, other supervisors, who have allowed this kind of behavior. If we go public, it could impact the entire department. Maya's gaze hardened. If we don't go public, it'll keep happening. People like Lisa will think they can get away with this. You want to change the system, Frank? You start by making this right. You start by showing that no one is above the law, especially not because of their biases. Frank met her gaze, nodding slowly. You're right. I'll make sure it's handled. And I'll make sure TSA and the FAA are involved. We can't let this slip under the radar. Maya felt a sense of relief, but it was fleeting. She knew the real work was just beginning. The investigation would take time, but it had to be thorough. She couldn't let Lisa's actions be dismissed with a slap on the wrist. Not when it was clear that this wasn't just an isolated issue. I want the full report, Maya said, her voice steady. I want to know everything. Lisa's training history, any complaints, and the steps being taken to address this. I'll be following up. Frank nodded. I'll get it for you. This won't be swept under the rug. Maya looked over at Lisa, who was now standing off to the side, avoiding eye contact. She had been caught. The consequences were coming for her, and there was no avoiding them. But Maya's work wasn't done yet. She would make sure that this wasn't just about one person. It had to be about creating lasting change. As Frank walked off to start the next steps, Maya felt a sense of determination settle in. She had taken the first step toward justice, but there was more to be done. And she wasn't going to stop until it was finished. As Maya walked away from Gate B32, her steps were steady, but the weight of what had just unfolded lingered in the air. The investigation into Lisa's actions was just beginning, but Maya knew the consequences would be far-reaching. This wasn't just about one woman's poor decision. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy, and ensuring that no one else would have to face the same disrespect she had. Maya thought back on the events of the day. It wasn't just the immediate injustice of having her passport torn up, it was the deep, underlying truth that had fueled her response. The assumptions people made based on appearance, the way biases could color someone's perception of another, and the systemic failure to recognize and correct those biases. This was a lesson that went beyond a single incident. It was a reflection of a larger societal issue, one that Maya knew she had to confront head-on. As she reflected on her actions, Maya realized that it wasn't just about getting justice for herself. It was about setting a precedent, making sure that the system didn't let someone like Lisa, someone who had abused her power and authority, get away with it. Maya understood that this wasn't just a matter of personal dignity. It was a matter of fairness and accountability. If people like Lisa were allowed to operate unchecked, then the system itself was complicit in perpetuating injustice. The real lesson Maya took from this experience was about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. She had chosen to confront the situation, to make it public, to demand that it be addressed. In doing so, she wasn't just fighting for her own dignity. She was fighting for others who had faced similar prejudices, for those who didn't have the strength or courage to speak out. Maya had seen how easy it was for people to accept bias as normal. The small slights, the microaggressions, the quiet judgments that many would dismiss as trivial, all of these, if ignored, added up to something much more damaging. She understood that real change didn't come from letting things slide, from allowing these moments to go unnoticed or unchallenged. Real change came from calling out the injustice when you saw it and making sure it was addressed. And that was what she had done. By standing up to Lisa, by demanding accountability, Maya had taken the first step toward making sure that these kinds of prejudices were no longer tolerated. She wasn't just addressing Lisa's actions. She was sending a message that no one, no matter their position, should feel empowered to treat people with disrespect simply because of their race, their appearance, or their background. But Maya knew that the road ahead would be long. Real change, systemic change, took time. It meant challenging the status quo, questioning the systems that allowed bias to thrive, and forcing those in power to confront uncomfortable truths. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but Maya was determined to see it through. As the investigation into Lisa's behavior progressed, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for what she had done, but for what it represented. It wasn't just about winning a battle or getting an apology. It was about making sure that the next person who walked through that gate wouldn't have to face the same prejudice. It was about shifting the culture one step at a time. Maya had taken a stand, and she had started a conversation that would echo far beyond that airport terminal. The lesson she had learned, and that she hoped others would take from this experience, was simple. Fairness and respect aren't just ideals to strive for. They're rights. And when those rights are violated, it's up to all of us to stand up and say, "This isn't right. It has to change." As Maya walked away from Gate B-32, she felt a quiet sense of resolve settle over her. The investigation was in motion, and the consequences of Lisa's actions were now out of her hands. But Maya knew this was far from the end. The process of accountability was just beginning, and she had no intention of letting it stop here. What had happened that day wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been unjustly treated, everyone who had suffered in silence because they didn't have the courage to speak up. Maya glanced around the bustling terminal as she made her way to her gate. The world seemed to continue around her, people rushing to their flights, families heading off to vacations, business travelers with briefcases in hand. But for Maya, the fight for fairness was more important than any flight. She had fought not just for her own dignity but for the dignity of everyone who had been made to feel less than because of their race, appearance, or background. Her actions today had set something in motion, something that couldn't be ignored. It was a reminder that when we stand up against injustice, no matter how small it may seem, we create ripples that have the power to change the course of things. Maya's decision to not back down, to demand accountability, was a simple but powerful act of defiance against a system that often lets small acts of prejudice go unchecked. As she boarded her flight, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had taken a stand. It wasn't about being right. It was about ensuring that what happened to her didn't happen to anyone else. And that, she knew, was the first step toward real change.